The nature of the job we asked them to do is unlike any other. And so when 9 active or former police officers in the province were lost to suicide last year, Ontario's chief coroner went to work. He assembled an expert panel to look for causes and solutions. We now have the results of that inquiry. With us to examine the issues it raised, Dr. Dirk Huyer. He is Ontario's chief coroner. Hugh Stevenson is here. He is Sault Ste. Marie's chief of police. Dr. Laurie Gray, psychologist and founder of Frontline Resilience, a mental health clinic in Barrie for first responders and a member of the expert panel behind the coroner's report. Bruce Chapman, president of the Police Association of Ontario, currently on secondment from Peel Regional Police, and Rob Jameson, president of the Ontario Provincial Police Association and currently a sergeant with the OPP as well. And it's great to have everybody around this table for a truly timely and important discussion. And obviously, Chief Coroner, I want to start with you as to why you felt the need to put the commission together in the first place.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. So first off, I just want to recognize the nine lost lives of the service members that died in 2018 and express my condolences to the family, friends, communities, and the services where they served. What I was seeing was a number of deaths of police service members despite multiple efforts to enhance the wellness of police services. So in 2012, the Ombudsman of Ontario released a report, and there was a number of steps taken by different police services and the Ministry of Solicitor General to try to enhance wellness strategies. So any deaths were too many, and even beyond that, I saw more deaths than we had seen in previous years. That drew my attention to the issue, and I brought a provincial focus to try to understand, is there some systemic issue that we're missing? Is there something else that we could be doing differently as a society and as a government and as a police service organization to try to improve wellness?
Given your position, you deal with death all the time, if I can put it that way. I mean, you've obviously investigated your office thousands of deaths over the years. I don't want to know everything you learned as a result of what you went through, but I would like to know, what's the single most important thing you now know that you didn't know before commissioning this report?
I think for me, the most significant thing that I learned was the identity of a police service member and how that identity extends all across their lives. It's not identity just at work, it's identity at home, at play, with their families, and at work.
What does that mean exactly?
So they are a position of significant responsibility within society. We look to police to be the final person that we'll call, or the final group that we'll call when there's a tragedy or a difficulty. They're running to violence while we're running away from it. They have this incredible responsibility of upholding the law, serving and protecting, and yet have an incredible amount of oversight and accountability given their significant responsibility. Many officers, as I understand, describe it as a calling, one where they want to serve society, they want to lead, they want to do their best to ensure the safety and the well-being of society. And that identity, as I say, extends right across their lives. They're heroes at home, bringing their work and their identity home, as well as with friends and others.
Understood. Laurie, what sort of details were you able to access working through the coroner's office that led to the findings in your report?
Certainly. The panel consisted of 8 members, 8 subject matter experts, each with diverse backgrounds, so each brought that information to the panel. We reviewed in detail all of the officers' lives and deaths, and then also interviews with the spouses, interviews with the families, interviews of people with lived experience. And then we also had a series of presentations from different groups that could help to shed additional light on police member wellness and suicide.
And I should ask you the same question I just asked the chief coroner. What do you now know that you didn't know before embarking on this?
Quite a lot. What stood out to me the most as a psychologist were the unique trajectories that culminate in increased risk for police officer suicide.
Unique trajectories, what does that mean?
So there's general risk factors within the general population, but when we looked at the lives and deaths of each of these police members, what we found was that there was 3 trajectories that culminated in their deaths. So there was one trajectory which was an acute escalation of mental health issues, often combined with substance use. There was another trajectory which was lost and diminished access to care. And the third trajectory, which was people that became disconnected. They became disconnected from their families, their friends, their colleagues, their workplaces, and then often there was a tipping point that precipitated their deaths.
So there's no one way that an officer in trouble eventually gets to suicide. It's way more complicated than that.
It was a combination of factors,
Combination.
but a combination of factors that was identifiable and certainly not invisible.
Gotcha. Chief, let me get you into this discussion. How would you describe police identity and how it meshes with mental health and suicide, picking up on what these two have just said?
Well, I would absolutely agree that police officers have an identity exclusive to what we do. Sometimes new members of agencies talk about, I always wanted to be a police officer. So it's in them from day one. And the biggest thing I've picked up from this report and from my discussions is that you have to look at the whole individual, the whole police officer. The police officer doesn't present as an individual. He or she comes from a whole network of experiences with family, with parents. And in fairness, there's a lot of stigma historically to come forward because we are the strong in the community. We are the strong in the family. And what we've tried to do, I think all of us collectively in policing for a long time, is remove that stigma and start to talk about it.
How successfully are you having at that?
Well, to be fair, I think we've come a long piece from where we were 25, 30 years ago, gentlemen, ladies. And even in our own service, the issue of talking about what we see our friend and family go through. We've started a peer-to-peer program in 2016 with funding from Let's Talk out of Bell, which was hugely powerful for us in terms of the fact that we now have nominated people in our organization who are tested psychometrically and also have the psychological interview to be able to interact with other officers and civilians in policing. And that, in addition to the fact that we also encourage families to talk about this. And so my last point is this, is that I think we can prevent a lot of this in the future if we continue to have friends and family open up about what they see differently in that member's life.
Bruce Chapman, let me get you in on this. How have the suicides in the units that you've had purview over, how have you dealt with those suicides?
Well, in the past, I think, Dr. Huyer's comment about the extraordinary powers that police officers have. And as a result of that, in the past, we have withheld our own personal struggles and dealing with the issues surrounding mental health and how we deal with occupational stress and post-traumatic stress on some of the incidents that we deal with. The past is I've had officers in my police association, my local police association, die by suicide. I've had members of my unit die by suicide. None of those were ever reported. They were almost hidden from the past. And I think we've come a long way in starting the conversation, normalizing mental health. And that was one of the main points in this report, is about normalizing mental health and removing the stigma one day at a time. And I think we've started. I think we have a long way to go, both in our organizations and amongst ourselves and our own organizations, to move that bar higher.
Rob, let me follow up with you on this issue of, you guys are all in a macho culture, right? And it's not exclusively male, but it's certainly more male than female. How does the fact that everybody feels a need to be incredibly tough and macho figure into all of this?
Well, it definitely figures into this, as has been mentioned previous by my colleagues on this panel. It is a culture traditionally that has evolved quite a bit to talk about the normalization of mental health issues. However, there's still that whole culture of being there for other people. And I always draw it to the airplane analogy where the masks come out of the ceiling, and you have to put that mask on yourself first before you can help other people. And in our culture, you just have to get to the point where we're continuing to talk more about these issues, whether it's this show or other opportunities to talk about it's okay to put your hand up and say, you know what, I need some help. But I think awareness of the issues is absolutely critical. We have seen folks who are suffering from PTSD or OSI issues.
Okay, PTSD I've heard of. What's OSI?
Occupational stress injuries.
Got it.
And there's just not that situational awareness. So I think from an awareness standpoint, it's absolutely critical. Stigma still exists. I also think that we have to encourage people to put their hands up and say, you know what, I'm not myself today. However, and we need to have their loved ones, spouses, also educated on some of the signs and symptoms that go along with that to assist. And then we have to have tangible support programs in place so when those hands do go up, that those folks are able to access that treatment and that support.
Laurie, I'm told 70% of police officers around the province are male. So I want to ask you about the 30% who are female. Do they feel they need to be as macho as their male colleagues?
You know, it's interesting. A good question. I personally don't feel that the issue is gender constrained. We select, we train, we reinforce police officers to put others before themselves while maintaining their own safety. We select, train, and reinforce them to maintain their stoicism. And it doesn't switch on and off like a light switch very easy. And it gets to a point where it permeates, and that takes a toll. If anything, from female police officers, many report that they have to be on par or greater than in maintaining that.
Is that something, Rob, in your experience, that when an officer is trained, regardless of gender, they are trained to be tough and macho? It comes with the gig.
I don't always think of it in terms of being macho, but I think that all of the partners, and I can only speak of sort of my own experience. I've had quite a number of partners on the job that have been women and phenomenal police officers, and I have the honor of representing so many phenomenal male and female police officers. I think it's a type of person that wants to get in. I think it was mentioned earlier by the chief about people feel it's a calling. So they go in with the expectations that they want to serve, they want to protect. And the people that I represent go in it with that attitude. So I haven't drilled down specifically, and I don't know if I'm qualified to give you that exact answer, but from my observations and the people that I represent, they go in, it's a calling, and they're phenomenal at what they do, and they want to protect and serve.
Bruce, at the risk of asking you to recall some of the most unhappy moments of your life, but I hope in the interests of kind of making sure the people watching and listening to this right now understand what you folks deal with on a regular basis, can you tell us about some of the worst nights of your life on the job?
Yeah, I'll give you a specific example that still, you think about every day. I was a young patrol sergeant, just been promoted. I was 10 years out of uniform. I went back to the road. I was assigned as a patrol sergeant to an area that I'd never worked before in East Mississauga. So you're out driving around in your sergeant's car, and you're there to back up your officers. And I come across a major intersection where there seems to be some smoke, and cars are starting to back up. I asked the dispatcher about if there's any reports of accident. None had been reported at that time. So I drove to the intersection, and there was a small car completely crumpled by a transport truck at an intersection, and the car was so badly damaged. So I called it in, requested emergency services, but it was one where you didn't have a chance to react to knowing what you were going to get yourself into, that there was a bad accident, reported, so you could prepare yourself. You come across this. I managed to get out of the car. It had just happened. People were just getting out of their own vehicles at that time. Ran to this small car. I basically held this 18-year-old female in my arms, and she died in my arms. Lo and behold, and then you have other responsibilities of ensuring the scene is protected. And then my next duty was as a patrol sergeant, having to drive down the road to the business where this young woman's parents were, where they were expecting her for lunch. She was going to see them for lunch, and to tell them that their daughter had passed away. Probably one of the most traumatic incidents that I've ever come across without any forewarning on what I was getting myself into. So, that night you go home, and it was the old culture, and what we need to change in this panel and in our industry is you just suck it up, you go home, and I slept with the lights on, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that young woman, and those will stick with you. As we progress further, with this report and with what we are doing as organizations, both services, associations, government, is we're changing that, and so that no one has to go through that and sleep with their lights on at night.
Did you seek any kind of mental health treatment after that episode?
No, because you were, at those times, you were considered weak and you were strong, and your job, you sucked it up. That's what you were hired to do. That's what you were supposed to do. And I think that mentality from the past is the past. And I think, our conversations going forward is that's not the present, and it's certainly not the future. We're losing people dying by suicide because of incidents like that. So that was a past, and no, I didn't, because I didn't want to be considered weak. And that's the philosophy that we all had as young officers years and years ago.
I want to read an excerpt from the Chief Coroner's report that looked into all this. Sheldon, let's bring this graphic up if we can. In most police jurisdictions across Ontario, estimates run as high as 40% of police calls for service being tied to incidents involving persons with mental health issues. Police members have reported to us directly and in other studies we consulted that notwithstanding their high degrees of compassion, training, and their on-scene professionalism, that is the norm in these thousands of calls for service, most police members will soon come to regard any person with mental health issues as someone they would never want to be. Chief Coroner, this does raise a whole lot of issues of, I should actually let you just start riffing on that. That's identified a really tough problem. What do you do?
Well, I don't have the answer on what to do, but I can tell you it was one of the most poignant things that I recognized in reading the report. It really, not only do the officers have this identity, but they also recognize what they see in those 40% are people in the worst days of their lives. And that becomes the norm for the officers as what a mental health issue is. And they're not like that in their minds. They're not like that person. When they're feeling sad or they're feeling anxious or they're having a tough day, that's not what those people were. So they don't attribute that to be a mental health issue and therefore don't think that they need to seek that help. And they don't want to become like those people that they were serving on their worst days. So that produces their own lack of ability to call out or to reach out. And so what we need to do in a shared way with all people involved with police service members is to recognize that that occurs, to recognize that mental health issues are very common and that people should be able to speak up and seek assistance. It's really about reaching to the upstream. When you have some early concerns, you deal with those concerns. As Rob said, I'm having a bad day. Okay, well, take today off and tomorrow I'm going to be back at it. It's really thinking about and recognizing that when you have a bad day, that's okay. And that we can all have bad days and we can all get over those bad days. Or if we don't, we can get some more help. But way before they get down to the pathways that Laurie talked about and the trajectories towards their deaths. If we could do all of that and bring people to recognize, to accept, to talk about mental health issues, then we're going to be so much stronger as police organizations and society.
Well, okay, that's in a perfect world, but Chief, I'm going to ask you, if one of your officers came to you and said, you know what, I'm having a tough time, I need a day, I need a mental health day, I mean, is it not, in some respects, the Chief's job to say, our resources are pretty low today, my friend, and I really need you out there? How do you resist from saying that to the guy?
You know what, Steve, good question. Historically, that's exactly what the response would have been. It would have been, sorry, we're tight today. Bruce, you mentioned it, suck it up.
Suck it up.
It'll get better, whatever. Today, honestly, I can talk about command staff at the chief and deputy level, at the middle manager level, at the middle manager civilian level, the road sergeants. If we hear that, and that person has come to us legitimately and said, I don't feel well today, take the day off, take tomorrow off. Is there anybody with you? Do you need somebody to visit you around the house? Here's the issue, Steve. These resources, these people and families, we have to take care of them. And we realize today, more so than ever, the outcome of not doing that and going down that trajectory. So, and I speak for the rest of my colleagues in policing at the chief level and the deputy, we understand the issue and the harm from not listening. And so when it comes to something like that, that just seems so simple to say, take the day off. We're a big enough organization to absorb that as a sick day. And I can say, I can take it one step further. When people come and say, you know what, we really have an issue, I'm just not feeling well today, get them to help that day, as opposed to simply a day off.
Yeah, and just to add to the chief there, I think there's onus on the police service, the police association, ourselves to recognize that we need additional resources. So when we're looking at collective agreements and budgeting for the end of the year with our municipalities and the government, is they have to recognize that if we don't treat our people early, we're going to lose them for a long period of time. So you invest $1 in their mental health today, you're going to save $10 in getting them back on the road in the future, and they're going to be alive to spend the rest of their career doing what their calling is.
Rob, I've heard the expression, well, it's in the report actually, broken toys.
Yes.
What does that refer to?
Well, actually, when I went off work in 2013, I was diagnosed with PTSD. In fact, I was referred to as a broken toy, so I can actually speak to that on a personal level and how detrimental that is. I think there's ignorance that is there. I think there are people that aren't acknowledging their own journey that they're on, and it's completely unacceptable that anyone would be referred to in those terms. So what we need, and I think what Bruce and everyone here is saying as well, is there also needs to be a paradigm shift in the way in which we treat our people. And I'm very pleased with our new commissioner, Thomas Carrique. He and I have established with our association and the OPP an incredible relationship. He gets it. He's very frontline focused. He's very about positive mental health and the collaboration, and it's a true partnership that we have. They won't have all the answers. We won't have all the answers, but through our partnering and collaborating and through it not being a conditional partnership, we can be there for one another and support our people in a much more effective manner. And in this day and age, as it always has been, words matter. And we have to be more responsible with the way in which we speak to our people. We have to also look at where the intersectionality between discipline and mental health comes into play. So we see so many of our officers getting caught up in systems. We have to deal with shame that exists, and we have to call people out that treat people in a disrespectful fashion. And the issue of shame and around the Police Services Act hearing decisions, we just went through negotiations earlier this year in the OPP. And one of the first things that I said on behalf of our association was, we are not going to go any further until we deal with the hearing decisions, which basically shows people at the worst time of their life, and it throws them in front of the entire organization for everyone to see. And we went through negotiations, and what happens now is those names within those reports are now anonymized. We are taking the shame away, and we can still be accountable to the process and the fact that we all have to be accountable, but it's the way in which we do that.
Rob, can I get personal with you for a second here? Because
Yes,
this is
sir.
not an academic exercise for you, and we're about to find out more about that. How many OPP officers in the whole province?
There's approximately 6,000.
And they all look to you for leadership because you're the head of the association.
Yes, sir.
You wrote an extraordinary letter not too long ago.
I did last year, yes.
Would you read an excerpt of that letter for us right now?
Yes. The second last paragraph of the letter that I wrote to my members after we dealt with the third suicide of one of an OPP member was, I write this message with tears in my eyes, not in thinking of my own journey, but of those we have lost and their families left behind. I have experienced extreme trauma as a result of doing my job as a police officer, and 4 years ago I needed to step away. This has been a personal journey, and it is difficult to share with thousands of people I do not know. However, I do so in the hope that it may give some strength to hang on, to speak to someone, and to know that you are not alone.
I can't quite imagine the guts it took for you to appear that vulnerable in front of your colleagues. So what did it take for you to be able to do that?
I looked at the strength that it must have taken for the widows and their families to have to go through that process. I looked at some internal pushback I got when I identified last year that the OPP had a problem on its hands. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and I looked at my daughters and my wife, and I said I needed to not make it about me, but I needed to get it out there in my position and to use my platform for the greater good and to talk about these things and to get real with mental health issues. And it was extremely frightening. as I was concerned that my words would be taken in the wrong context and possibly add additional harm. But in fact, when I did that, shortly thereafter, the OPP commenced its internal review on mental health. And I was inundated with people from around the province and members that wanted to open up about to the point where I was physically and mentally exhausted after several weeks of this. It was unbelievable. I did not anticipate this reaction. However, I think it's incumbent upon those in positions, especially of leadership, to get real on these issues and realize that we are servant leaders. We exist for the members, and we have an obligation to make sure that we do everything within our power. And sitting idly by in the shadows on a personal level, for me, was not an option.
Dr. Gray, how do you think we create a culture or a set of circumstances around the province that allow more people to be that open and honest about their own situations?
I think we need to remember that police officers can struggle profoundly and yet continue to function. They can continue to fulfill their roles and responsibilities, but they can be impacted profoundly at the same time. So if we wait until it gets to a point where a police officer says, I tap out, I have nothing left, they're very far down the pipeline, versus that needs to rewind and be much more proactive supportive care. The report revealed incredible gaps, barriers, deficiencies in care. It shed light on the trajectories, but it also revealed that we need to address all of those pieces. So for instance, there's many services that are doing a great job of identifying resources, mental health resources that are suitable for police officers, that are getting their people right into definitive care right away. And the other piece to that, which was the title of the report, was making sure that people stay connected. It was incredibly heartbreaking to learn a number of police members stating that, initially people were supportive and they were there, but the longer that I was off, the days, the weeks as they went on, I heard from fewer and fewer people. So we need to improve the communication, the connection, and the relationship with our injured officers. And with that, we need to approach mental health with an awareness that these are not deficiencies, they're injuries.
As someone who runs a police service, Chief, can you tell when you've got an officer who's in trouble?
Well, it's not hard when you look at their eyes and you hear their story and you realize that this person, they're going down a path that isn't healthy. They've told you, I don't feel well today. And
But those are the easier cases. What about the cases where somebody's trying to push through, they're trying to suck it up? Can you tell when they're in trouble?
well, you see, that's a good point because, as we go down this mental health journey, it's important for everyone to watch each other. Policing for me has always been a team approach. The guys and gals on your shift, your sergeant, as much as we need to be concerned about health and safety risks dealing with the public, we need to be more concerned about the health and safety issues in our own lives. And that's where it takes people to notice things. Colloquially, you'll hear things like, why isn't Huey interested in flying anymore? How come he doesn't connect with that group that he always used to laugh with, Rob and the boys? How come he's, going down this path? He seems awfully reserved. That's where we need, and we're doing it in our service on the peer-to-peer counseling piece, where we watch over each other.
You got to have a kind of a regular check-in.
And my point there too is it's as much for us at the job, but it's also for those families because they see them more than we do. And as we go down this journey of how can we do better, my perspective in our service is we need to train family members on those signs and check it early.
Gotcha. Bruce, you wanted to add?
I'll expand on the chief. Individually, as an individual, as a chief or an association president, no, I don't think we can individually say this person's suffering or that we don't see, but collectively we can. So one of my points that I made to the expert panel was self, service, and spouse. And I use those three not as silos, but as pillars to be used together. So self-identification, notifying, knowing that I'm not right, I am sick, or I am not feeling well, or I need a day off. Service, for the service to have services in place within the service, organizational wellness, the ability to get psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever they need for their health and wellness, and spouse or family, because they are the first ones to usually recognize when an individual police officer or police member is starting to suffer. They'll notice the changes before we will at work. Yeah. So that collectively being able to use that, then we'll know our people are at risk and be able to help them.
If I could just follow up on Bruce's point, and it's a great segue, is that one of the things that we've learned through this process as well is we used to have caps on our psychological services. And we administered...
We mean the OPP?
We did, yeah. So the association administers the benefits for all members of the OPP, inclusive of all the way up into the commissioner and our retirees. And we had caps on the amount that they could obtain psychological services. But you can't offer these services, capping it when it involves mental health. So we were successfully negotiated, similar to other services around the province, unlimited psychological supports. We removed that barrier. For what I learned through the process is that creates a barrier for those people that are wanting to seek treatment. So now they can get in. We've actually seen quite a spike of people using unlimited psychological supports, and I think that's a great thing.
And is that, in fact, the case not just for the OPP, but for all police services across the province now?
I represent the 47 local associations throughout the province, and that's where we're going towards. Some have unlimited, some just bargained unlimited, and the push is to ensure that all associations, all services have unlimited psychological care, because like I said earlier, invest $1, save $10, and that is that's a reality of the situation. We need to look after our people.
Okay, it's one thing to have, technically speaking, access to unlimited care if you need it. You would have a good sense about whether or not, in fact, the resources are there in the province for people to avail themselves of these services if they need them. Are they there?
Great question. Certainly access to care and addressing access to care issues is the first step. However, what we found within the review was that people were lost in the system. There was gaps in care. They weren't sure where to turn. And I think one of the biggest tragedies that came out of the review was the spouses of the deceased officers. They often identified changes in their loved one, yet they weren't sure where to turn. And further to that, they weren't sure where to turn in a way that would not have negative repercussions to their loved ones' careers. And this is where it comes circling back to its accessibility of resources, making sure they're pre-screened, they're suitable for police members, but making sure that information gets to who needs it, which is the police member, its colleagues, it's their families, and making sure they know how to get into care and that it's there.
Did you want to add something?
Yeah, and on that point, that's, we talked a lot last year, and we've been talking a lot about this, but we needed to do more. So in the OPP Association, what we did is we developed a plan that was comprehensive and integrated. We managed to secure the funding from the provincial government, and on March 29th of this year, with the Solicitor General, Sylvia Jones, we made an announcement about our program to talk about exactly what Dr. Gray is speaking of, because people need that awareness piece I was talking about. They also need ease into the system. It needs to be 24/7, 365. It needs to be a circle of care. That disconnect aspect we were talking about. When they put their hand up, we need to take their hand and bring them through the process, and making sure families have the information they need as well. So we are at the point right now where we're getting ready to, hopefully in the near future, launch our program, which will provide very tangible supports, and making sure that there's pre-treatment, there's pre-care, there's treatment facilities, there's aftercare. Because what we're seeing as well is that our folks that go to, let's say, Homewood right now, when they're done their treatment, they go back home. And then the phone has stopped ringing, and there's this disconnect. And we hear that time and time again, and I've experienced that personally, that disconnect. You need to stay...
Disconnect meaning your friends just drop you?
Life goes on, and you go to work and you think, if I'm not here, then the whole community's going to fail. But no, there's others that pick up the torch and continue on, and you realize really quickly sort of who your friends are to some degree, and it's a really humbling process, and it's a really difficult process. And the effect that puts on families as well. So we're hoping with the implementation of our plan that's coming out, we can address some of what Dr. Gray is talking about, because You're spot on with your comments. It's absolutely real. We see spouses and family members that don't know where to turn, and we need to all do a better job at making sure that we provide the supports to those family members when they need them.
We've just got a couple of minutes left here, and I guess since this kind of started with you, I want to circle back to you. What's your message now for families who are in the middle of all of this?
My message is one that we all need to work together to help to solve this problem. We want to enhance the wellness and supports for police service members across Ontario, but it's a shared responsibility. Everybody's talked about individuals who get involved. Rob's talked about police service members. Bruce talked about associations. The chief's talked about leadership. Laurie's talked about mental health provisions. Families need to be involved. Everybody needs to contribute and bring every piece to the table. Rob talked about working with the commissioner together and how it's a partnership and a collaborative work. Everybody knows something about this. Everybody needs to contribute to finding solutions that are going to normalize this issue and allow people to recognize that they have mental health issues and that that's okay. And they can get better and they'll resolve. And if they don't, they'll get care that they need to get. And that care needs to be defined, evidence-based, and available and navigatable, as Rob has described it. So those are the messages that I feel strongly about when I read the report, when I talk to those with lived experience. And I heard from many, many, many through this journey of the report, and phenomenal stories and incredible resilience, incredible strength.
What does the chief coroner see as his responsibilities now going forward?
I think my responsibilities are to support those who are taking that shared role of moving things forward. I'm available as a resource to talk about our report, just as I did here today, but the responsibility, I will contribute wherever is desired, but I'm not the lead in it, but I will be there whenever people want me anywhere.
Gotcha. I want to thank all of you for coming in today and having what is a very important discussion and dealing with it in such an open way. I'm really grateful, and hopefully, if I can use the football metaphor here, we can move the ball down the field a little bit. So I thank all of you for coming from near and far. Sault Ste. Marie is pretty far to get to our studios today. Thank you so much to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.